Now, in saying this, I'm very aware that of the challenges that you are facing just now in the region, with over 5 million people affected either directly or indirectly by ETA and IOTA across nine countries. I just want to say that I come from a remote rural area in Scotland, and if it's any reassurance, you've been in our thoughts and prayers over this past 10 days, because it's been very much on the news here, what's going on and how challenging it must be for you. I want to just say a few words. I'm sure we'll come back to this during the Q&A, but a few words about a post-crisis situation. After any crisis or natural disaster, the priority, all of which requires engineers and infrastructure, the priority needs are water, access, and communication. And in such a situation, it's particularly important that collaboration is good, transparency is good, well-informed planning takes place, a focus on good preparation and coordination. They're more important than ever. So these are all features of CoST which become even more relevant in a post-crisis situation. Now, we can address this a bit during the Q&A. Just to mention one thing, I think most of you are too young to remember this, but in the 1970s, after the Vietnam War, there was a crisis of the Vietnamese boat people crossing the ocean and arriving as refugees in various countries. And it was a huge refugee crisis. And a colleague of mine in the company that I was working with formed a group called REDR, that's R-E-D-R, the Register of Engineers for Disaster Relief. And this basically mobilized engineers from all over the world to be able to leave their jobs and to go and help out with helping with access and water and refugee camps and all of the things that are normal in a crisis. REDR has now grown into a worldwide organization. It isn't particularly active in Latin America, but it was involved in the follow-up to the earthquake in Haiti. But they have developed some things like a security incident information management system, and they do very good training for engineers. And the idea is that engineers, when there's a crisis, many of the people who are displaced or affected by the crisis have the same expertise that is needed to address the crisis. So there are engineers and there are teachers and there are planners and logistic experts amongst the people who have been displaced. So part of the focus is to try to help them get to a state that they can help. I mustn't be distracted now by that too much, but it's important to be aware of that guidance note. It's very short, but it's certainly worth looking at. And then finally, of course, perhaps most importantly, is people. Within CoST, there are many experienced people within the more mature programs. I was saying this to people from Asia and Africa, and I was encouraging them to get in touch with people from Latin America, because particularly in your region, there's some really good examples of good practice within CoST, and of course emerging good practice in each country. Okay, the guidance note. I won't go through it in detail, but just a quick overview. It's consistent with the manual, but it just gives the big picture. And those of you with experience of assurance will know how even the most basic activity is never as simple in practice as it appears to be in theory. And the manual tries to help in that regard. The guidance note gives a big picture. So it starts with a basic introduction and an overview of where assurance fits within the flow of data and information. It then goes on to summarize the purpose and function of assurance. And that's important to, you'll hear me often talking about this. It's important because when making decisions about priorities, it's good to always think, well, I've got a choice of this or that. Which one contributes most to the purpose, to the objective? And then don't waste time on activities that do not contribute to that purpose. Then a brief mention in part 4 of commissioning an assurance process. That's as you procure the services of somebody to do the assurance. In the manual, there's a lot about this because it's very important. But one point to make, which I find it's often misunderstood, is that even if assurance is undertaken by direct appointment, you still need a procurement process. You still need the person or team that is doing it to make a proposal so that they're accountable and there's clarity over exactly what is being achieved and how. Again, there's a lot of detail in the manual. Then in section 5, it reminds us all that the focus is not on duplicating existing accountability mechanisms. It's on strengthening them. So it's not a technical audit or inspection, partly because of insufficient resources to do that, but also because there are other people responsible for that, or there should be. And if they're not, the job of CoST isn't to do it for them, it's just to point out that that function is not being fulfilled. Then in part 6, we have the step-by-step approach, which I'm sure you're familiar with. I don't know if you see my cursor, but you can, yes. For the site visit, you might notice that I have actually changed the graphic that used to be there because I was never comfortable. There used to be a picture of somebody during a site visit, of somebody with a measuring tape holding up and doing a measurement. I felt that gave the wrong signal. You don't go on a site visit with CoST to take measurements or to do compaction tests or that sort of thing. You ask questions. If you think that a measurement is incorrect, then you can politely ask the question of your host, the contractor, could you please measure that? So it's all about asking questions, not making judgments and not making them feel that you have come in to inspect them. That's not what it's about. You're going there just to observe, to see what differences there are, if any, between what you were expecting to see based on your preparation and what you see there. And a big part of that is what is happening consistent with the contract and the other systems in place. Then there's a brief section on sampling, random sampling. In most of your countries, you've got a lot of data, so you have to sample from that. There's a good section in the manual about this, but the basic principle is that you have to start with a list of all the possible projects that could be subject to assurance. And you have to, in that list, in a simple spreadsheet, you have to give them attributes. So there's perhaps large, medium, and small, or urban and rural, or water or roads and power. And once you want a random selection, but you know your budget limit, once you've done one random selection and you end up with a big urban water project, you want to make sure that you exclude other big urban water projects because you want to have a mixture of different types of project and different jurisdictions and different scale. But you might do that and you find that there are no projects at all in your random selection that are the ones that everybody at the public are interested in. So you should keep a proportion of them for ones that are particularly of public interest. But again, don't just pick those make a list of all the ones that could be in that category, and then randomly select from those. So you could honestly say that there's a random element in the selection of all the projects subject to assurance. This approach has two advantages. One is that any project could be subject to assurance, and the other is that the overall mix, there'll be some projects which the public will think, oh yes, CoST is looking at a project that I'm particularly interested in. I can't hear anything or see anything, so I hope that this is you can hear this okay. Perhaps you could give me a thumbs up or something, Manu, if
yes,
that's
everything
okay.
is okay, Hamish. Thank you.
Okay. It's a strange feeling talking to nothing, you know. Okay. And then site visits. I've already mentioned that you don't go taking measurements and so on. I suppose the big thing about a site visit is before you go there. If I saw an assurance team on their way to do a site visit, and I wanted to check if they were prepared, I would ask them to explain to me the accountability mechanisms on that project. Who was responsible for what? What system was there for internal audit or for supervision or for external audit or for inspections? What systems, what's the exact role of the supervising consultant and the exact responsibility? So if you don't know that, you can't present what you're doing in a way that helps reinforce that, because the aim is to reinforce the existing accountability mechanisms and strengthen them. And then, of course, there's turning data into compelling information, which we've seen lots of examples of that on the CoST website. But in analyzing data, you need to have some idea of what's important or what's likely to be important, because otherwise you could spend a lot of time doing lots of analysis that doesn't yield anything that's of particular interest. But some basic things are always to analyze and report on levels of disclosure, which is intermediary outcome. And of course, time and cost deviations are always of interest. But that's not enough. You need to start to understand what the drivers are that are causing these. And writing the report, there's a good graphic here in the guidance note about how the core content needs to be expressed as a coherent narrative with evidence-based and constructive recommendations. And then, of course, there's no point in an assurance report just if it's just on a shelf. It has to be used. So it's launched, and it's launched in the name of the multi-stakeholder group, so that it has some teeth, and then the role of the media in spreading the word about what's in the report. So that's the guidance note. The manual itself, it's got 6 parts in a logical structure. It starts with an introduction and then an overview of how assurance works. Then there's a big chunk, 11 sections, subsections, sorry, on procuring an assurance report. That's how the MSG or their host organization goes about obtaining the services of an assurance individual or team to do the work. Now, the manual is like sort of a reference library. You don't have to read it from the start to the end. You can dip into it, and it's quite well structured and quite modular. So if you're an assurance team, you might be interested in reading that part about procuring the report, but you'd be more interested in the activities of the assurance team under part 4. And then, of course, things go wrong. So section 5 gives an overview of some of the problems that can arise. It doesn't answer them all, but it gives some ideas about what can go wrong and how to address that. And the reason for including it is partly just to reassure you that things do go wrong. It's quite normal, but there are always ways to reduce the risk of that and to address the risk when it arises. And then, of course, the report being written isn't enough. It has to be launched and the follow-up. So there's a lot more detail on that. And then the annexes. We'll look at these later. And I say there's the overview, then the ACTS tool, then there's 4 tools just to measure or to process, to monitor the process of analyzing the data with all the disclosure and asking for clarification and then reactive disclosure, all of those things. And then the last 3 are tools to download what's in the mind of the assurance team. Okay, now at this stage, I want a bit of feedback. For those of you, I think 19 of you, when I checked, I think there've been more since, but when I checked the webinar questionnaire, and there was a question there about priority areas of interest. And of the priorities identified, the 4 most popular were, well, first of all, almost everybody asked for more about the Excel-based tools and asked about when the manual would be available in Spanish. So Excel-based tools was one of them. But then the 4 top ones, apart from that, were analysis of disclosed data, the verification of disclosed data, the primary data gathering from site visits and interviews, and then communication of results. So you now have a choice to select a priority from these. So that's each of you will be asked to choose 2 from this list. I'm going to launch a poll now, I hope. Okay, I think that's appeared. So could you just choose 2 of those? Just click on 2 of them, and then after a few minutes, we've got it's showing 69 participants just now. I don't know who they all are, but that's very encouraging.
Hamish, they are just allowed to choose 1 option.
Two options. They can lose 2.
In the pool, I think there's not multiple options. Only.
Sorry. Okay, it only lets you. That's my fault. So just choose one. Just choose your top one. That's fine. That makes it easier because it means that somebody can't then choose 5. We've had 44 responses so far.
There are some participants that are not allowed to choose, so I think we can.
Okay. Okay. So I'm going to end the poll now and share the results. Okay. So so the 3. Could you do a screenshot of that? I mean, because I'll lose it otherwise.
I cannot see because I'm.
I'll do that. It's fine.
Sorry.
Okay, so the top ones are analyzing disclosed data, Excel-based tools, and communicating results. Okay, great. I can't enter that here, but you've just seen that. Okay, so now, and I'm sorry, you've not been talking yet. Okay, at least there's been a bit of feedback. I'm going to keep talking for a bit now about those things, but then after that it'll be you talking. Okay, so I'm looking forward to that. So the first one was analysis of disclosed data. Okay, each of these topics is addressed in detail in the manual. So I'll just say a few words about each of these things. So I'll just pick up that slide. The first thing to note is that it depends on the quantity of data. If you have a system where you have reliable data from thousands of projects, which does happen in some countries, then there is enormous scope for analyzing that data and looking at it in all sorts of different ways and coming up with patterns. And I love data, and I love playing with data and seeing what correlations there might be. But that's an endless process. You can do all sorts of things with it. It's very interesting, provided you can trust the data. But ultimately, you need to be able to prioritize what you're looking for. You need to have some idea that you're looking. You've got an idea of what might be an issue. And you're saying, what data do we have that informs my position about that issue? So there are many things that can help you prioritize. The main one is if members of the assurance team are familiar with the sector or that kind of project, or even familiar with that project, they might know things that typically go wrong. They might know, for instance, that there's typically an inconsistency between the design and the bill of quantities. So they could be looking at those issues that relate to that, to variations perhaps. But the ACTS tool, which I'll describe later, is really helpful to guide you in a direction of something that might be worth analyzing. I can give you one example. In Africa, in Ghana, the city of Sekondi Takoradi is one of the most recent members of CoST. And when I was writing the manual, I wanted just an example of somebody using this ACTS tool. So I sent it off to Ghana, and an hour later, I got it back. And basically, the assessment, it just took 1 hour. The assessment was, there is no reward for good behavior. That was one of the questions. Is good performance rewarded? No reward for good performance. So if I was doing an assurance process within that context, when not just the government, but also the contractors and consultants all say the same thing, I'd be looking for data that could point the report into a finding that shows that contractors who perform well are penalized and those who perform badly are rewarded. And that would be a really powerful way, because you'd have data behind that, but you have an idea beforehand of what you're looking for as well. But of course, you shouldn't only be looking at data that reinforces a view that you've already begun to form. You should be open to whatever the data says. And sometimes it can surprise you what you find. But again, because of limited resources, there are many issues that could be important. But if you've got a choice between a finding that is really exciting and interesting, but it cannot realistically lead to a recommendation that will change anything, that's less important than one that can lead to a recommendation which might change policy in the sector or might change practices on that. And finally, and I keep saying this all the time, is do the basics well. Much better to analyze 5 data points really well and than to analyze 40 badly. Because the simplest data collected over time becomes very compelling if you look at it in detail. And I've got time to go into detail there, but that can really work. Okay, the next thing was the Excel-based tools. Okay, and I'm going to start here just with an extract from the annex of the manual. So I've talked about Annex 2. It builds on this idea in the manual of this ACTS framework. And just to explain very briefly, what this does is say, you look at what drives good performance. So in the red circle here, capacity drives good performance, but it makes it possible. But to make it happen, you need accountability. For it to flourish, you need trust, but even that's not enough if you haven't got an enabling institutional and legal setting. And each of these breaks down into 3 different aspects. You can't read it here, but that's not the point. The point is there are 12 different drivers of good performance. And if any one of those is weak or absent, it then becomes a driver not of good performance, but of inefficiency, mismanagement, and corruption. So if you can list these 12 things and make an assessment of are these strong, medium, or weak, then you can quickly see what might be the weaknesses in management and therefore the risks of corruption or mismanagement or inefficiency. So this is what this tool here is about. Then the next tool in Annex 3 is to help assess the completeness of proactive disclosure. So again, you've got the project level and the contract level. Then Annex 4 is to help evaluate the accuracy of proactive disclosure. And I'll be looking at an example of that. Then Annex 5, to assess the response to queries about proactive disclosure. One of the problems in some countries is that the assurance team is missing data. They ask questions for it to be disclosed, but they forget when they asked it and they don't follow up. So this just helps you keep track of what was there, what was not there, when you asked, and when it was provided, if it was provided. Then Annex 6 is to help record and assess the status of reactive disclosure. This is when you ask for information that is on the reactive disclosure. This chart here is a bit different. It's a different category. It's a tool that is not for use by the assurance team. Normally, it's along with an S-curve and this sort of monitoring tool. It's what you'd expect to see the managers on a site making use of in some way. I'm not suggesting that this is the best version of that tool, but there normally would be some tools in place. Don't forget, when you visit a construction site, there's all sorts of experts managing and monitoring that site at various different levels. So don't presume that you know better than them. You might, but there's normally an awful lot more going on than you can see in terms of monitoring. And then the tools to draw down what's in the head of the assurance team. It's to looking at the strength or weaknesses of management processes to do with quality management, health and safety, and the environment. Looking at past recommendations at the sector level and the project level to see if they've been implemented, and then capturing. Sorry, that was there, and then here capturing data in the post-assurance report. And just to dig in on one of those, on the one looking at the strengths of processes, in each row here, it's looking at the invitation documents, the invitation to bidders. So looking at those documents. The next row is what's in the contract. And the third row is what you see in the site visit. And then in the columns, that's quality management, environmental and social protection, and then health and safety. And so here are the instructions, and then you can decide, is that, these are the drivers, are these medium, none, the compliance with that, is it high or low basically, or none, and you can put comments in there. But again, I'll give an example of that. Okay, I'm going to just try and share a different screen now. Great. I must just say, it's a great relief that all this screen sharing is working, because on the seminar on Tuesday with Asia and Africa, it didn't work, basically. There was a bug in the version of Zoom that I was using, and Clara had to take over and do the screen sharing for me. So it's a delight that it's actually working. Okay, so here's the one looking at for the ACT framework, looking at the drivers of inefficiency, mismanagement, or corruption. So here we have capacity, accountability, trust, and the institutional setting. And each of these breaks down. I don't know if you can see it, but capacity, for instance, is resources, then operating procedures, and skills and experience. So all you do, you have to say what's being assessed there, who's assessing it, and the date. Always remember to always fill in those fields, or else it'll be a useless tool afterwards. But then you assess this after reading the input message. You choose either yes, it's evident, partial, it's partly evident, or no, it's not evident. And then here's the question, in this case here, does the entity have access to sufficient quantity of resources to fulfill its role at the required scale and scope? So if you think yes, just do a yes there, and you can put a comment in there. Does it have clear operating procedures? If you say, well, there's evidence of some, but not very much. And if there's a problem with the skills and experience, you can put no and put a comment there. And you do this for each of these. And you might say, well, who's assessing it? Well, it could be a member of the assurance team who's got experience of the sector. You could ask the client or the project owner to make that assessment. You could ask the contractor to make the assessment. And you can do it either very superficially or in great depth. But what you're looking for is patterns where everybody agrees. For instance, in the case of in Ghana, everybody agreed that good performance was not rewarded. Okay, so that's an issue. So it's a really powerful tool. This I've been using this for 12 years, not just in managing corruption risks, but in managing performance. If there's a project that's behind schedule, and I want to help get it back on track, I will use this to try to help everybody work together to get the project back on track. Okay, so that's, whoops, I've lost it now. Okay, I'm just going to move something out of the way there. Okay, the next tool is this one here, to do with proactive disclosure. As always, the project, the assessor, and the date. So you're familiar with these. These on the left here are the 40 data points from proactive disclosure. But you can say, just describe briefly what's been disclosed and where it is. You know, did you get that from a website or from a newspaper or from some written records? And was it easy to access? And it describes what it means by that. Is it consistent with the IDS? And is it consistent with the OC for IDS? Okay, maybe no. And you do this for every bit of data, and then it will automatically generate a percentage. So here it's 14% because I've just got the one there. And that's at the project level at the top and the contract level. And then it will give an overall summary of ease of access and disclosure. So it analyzes all of that for you. Some of you, on the last seminar, some people asked, why are these worksheets password protected? The answer is because behind this spreadsheet, there are some formulae which generate the results of these calculations, which have been independently checked. The problem is if somebody edits that and makes a mistake, then you could be putting in data there and it comes up with the wrong percentage. If somebody wants to improve one of these spreadsheets or develop it, then that's fine, as long as you make clear that it's a different version, and then we can provide you with a password so that you can edit the formulae and develop it further and improve it further. In the same way for proactive disclosure, the perceived accuracy. This is the list of items there, and the categories here are plausible, inconsistent, implausible, or missing. So you could say it was inconsistent because it was two different numbers. That was clear. That was inconsistent because it was described different ways. The name was right. The location was missing, perhaps. The purpose was missing, and the list was plausible. Okay, and you can see here on the right, it then populates these cells here, which you can't edit, and then it gives you a summary of the accuracy assessment at the project level and at the contract level, and then at the level of that project with this contract. Okay, and in the same, I won't go into this detail, in the same way with queries, if you raise an issue, it just keeps a record of gives you instructions of why you raised it. Was it because it was inconsistent or missing? What date you raised it, and date it was resolved, if it was resolved. Then we have for reactive disclosure, the date requested, date received, and then it'll generate the average number of days that it took. This is that monitoring tool. Now we're coming to the assessment of the strength or weaknesses of management processes. Again, always put in the contract, assessor, and date. Always do that first. Then, so this first row is all about the instructions to bidders. So here we have the instructions, the point system. So it's high if the instruction to bidders include a requirement to do with, in this case, quality management, in this case, environmental protection, in this case, health and safety, include a requirement to comply with one or more recognized international standards. Okay. Medium is a requirement to comply with a relevant national standard. Obviously, it's the highest of whichever it is. The next one is, it includes a requirement, but it falls short of a relevant national standard. And the final one is none. There's no reference in the documents to any requirement there. So you make an assessment based on that. Let's say you say, yep, it requires international standard for quality management. But the contract doesn't have any requirement there, okay? And on the site visit, actually, there was medium level of, you could observe quality systems in place. On site, you don't judge quality. You can assess whether quality management is taking place. Are they doing testing? If there's asphalt being laid, is the temperature being taken? Are there slump tests being done before every major concrete pour? Very, very simple things. Then there's environmental protection, the same thing, and there's guidance there, so you can make an assessment there. You might find it's actually higher on site there. And then finally, health and safety. You can make an assessment there. This is really good because this is taking something that's in the head of the assurance team and putting it into quantitative form, based on observations in a very structured way. Then the status of recommendations. Have there been past recommendations? If so, what date and which report? And then you summarize each recommendation, and you look at the degree of implementation. In fact, I've just found a mistake in that spreadsheet, so I'll have to correct that. That should be a drop-down menu showing all of that. And then finally, there's the post-assurance data summary, which each of these rows is a record. So that row there, row A, keeps going down here as well. Okay, so if we put the project reference there and the contract reference here, as I enter that will appear down here. So that's then more detail of this contract. So it would look at the main area of concern, tender management, secondary area of concern, put a preparation, and if you say other, you put the text in there. Then our issues to do with monitoring employment by gender, are they required in the contract? Are they disclosed? And if they are disclosed, what's the number? Level of community engagement and the link with cost accountability mechanisms. So this is whether a project is ongoing, suspended, and which sector it's in. Okay, so this just draws on data that is already there, but it gives a really good summary, which can be sent back also to the International Secretariat. And later on, I'll be showing you an example of some of the things that can be learned from these reports when they're analyzed centrally. Part of the reason for the assurance manual is to improve the consistency in reporting so that lessons can be learned and shared between countries. Okay, I'm going to stop that sharing now and we're now into the Q&A. So I'm going to stop. Actually, no, I'll just quickly do one thing just to make the Q&A easier. I want to just quickly show how assurance has helped. And this is a graphic that that Mario Prado has prepared, and it's just looking at how the impact of cost around the world. And you can see, for instance, Thailand, massive savings, which the government says is because of the scrutiny arising from cost. Afghanistan, the cost assurance report recommended establishing a design review unit, and in the first year, they reckon it saved. Well, the minister reckoned it saved $8 million. And Ukraine has launched a really good series of dashboards that provide real-time information about projects which are being used now by investors and contractors. That's proved very, very popular. And then across in your region, there's a every feature of cost is important, and you can't do without it. But my sense is that assurance is the one that ends up being the key, because that is what turns the data into compelling information that leads to action.
Hamish,
okay, I'm going to stop sharing now. Yeah.
The full screen, because we can see only the.
Sorry. Sorry, I knew I'd. Yeah, it was just those. That's the one there. Is it better?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, so that was the world map, focusing in on the examples there from Thailand, Afghanistan, and Ukraine. Yeah, and then the one here. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing now, and we've got Q&A, and I hope I can hear your questions, and I'm sure there'll be plenty of them. And I'm sorry I've been talking non-stop, but we've got another hour, well, almost an hour. Yeah. So that's great.
Thank you very much, Hamish. I think that if someone wants to make a question in Spanish, you should join the English translation channel in the interpretation button, Hamish. Or if you want to do your questions in English as well, you can do it directly. If you want to do a question, you can raise your hand. Si quieren hacer una pregunta, pueden levantar la mano con el icono de levantar la mano.
Manuel.
Puedes usar la palabra, Hazel. Sí, te doy la palabra.
Gracias. Bueno, yo primero que nada saludar a Hamish, felicitarlo por este esfuerzo. Como él lo ha dicho, no es algo fácil. En nuestra experiencia en Guatemala, pues todo parte de nuestro estudio de línea base, en donde se intenta tener una visión macro de los tomadores de decisión, de las instancias que giran en torno a la infraestructura pública del país, para luego volcarnos a ver casos específicos. Para nosotros es muy importante
specific cases. For us, it's
para así poder integrar en la multisectorial a quienes puedan contribuir en este proceso. Creo que comprender el mecanismo de aseguramiento que se proponen por parte de CoST y su valor agregado, creo que es lo principal. Cómo iniciar el proceso y, por ejemplo, en nuestro caso, muy importante, y creo que para los demás también, la base legal para hacerlo. a quiénes involucrar y me voy a permitir decir incluso qué compromisos asumirán los actores que involucremos en el proceso. Esta guía que hoy nos pone a disposición Hamish nos ayudará de sobremanera a adoptar los resultados y guiar de mejor manera al equipo de aseguramiento. Creo que tener claridad de cómo documentarlo de toda la iniciativa nos ahorra tiempo y nos enfoca. Sin embargo, buscamos, como fin último, buscamos la incidencia como mecanismo de auditoría social, que es per se este mecanismo de aseguramiento. Entonces, el acompañamiento para la implementación de las recomendaciones es lo que nosotros hemos identificado como el gran reto. Entonces, quería permitirme compartirlo con ustedes y de nuevo agradecer a Hamish por la herramienta. Estaremos viéndolo detenidamente para paulatinamente irle haciendo consultas y apropiándonos del mismo, y seguiremos en comunicación para la retroalimentación que estoy segura que Hamish pues necesita para seguir mejorando la herramienta. Y bueno, ansiosa de escuchar también a los colegas que han implementado el aseguramiento en sus países. Gracias y saludos a todos. También tengo un anuncio que Evelyn va a reiterar, que es extenderles una muy cordial invitación, también después de nuestro evento del índice de transparencia y su lanzamiento, como otra herramienta valiosa de CoST, es el encuentro regional de transparencia en conmemoración de la década de CoST en Guatemala. Van a estar participando varios ponentes de nuestra región y vamos a integrar un conversatorio de la obra pública, así que cordialmente invitados, y vamos a estar socializando el link con ustedes a la brevedad posible. Saludos de nuevo y muchas gracias.
Thank you, Hazel. I'd like to just pick up on one of the points you made, a very important point about the mandate. As when it comes to assurance, you don't want the assurance team to be turning up in some government office demanding an interview or demanding information or that sort of thing. It needs to be very well organized in advance, so that there's absolute clarity over what the procuring entity has agreed to do, and that all that is then asked of them is to do what's already been agreed in advance, and that there's authority from the minister or whatever to do that. And there's a very important role here for the multi-stakeholder group. I know some countries where members of the MSG say, well, what are we going to do? What is there for us to do? Well, one very important thing that a government member of the MSG can do is to make sure that the assurance team has the access that is required to the right people in government, and then in turn that it's arranged they have access to other stakeholders such as the contractor and the consultant, and to do that in a very clear and respectful way, so that nobody feels that they're being bounced into it. One other quick thing just to say, I actually forgot to go back after Excel tools to the issue of communicating results, which was one of the things that was asked about. So if there's time or in the Q&A, if you want to address that question, then I can go back to that.
Muchas gracias. No sé, Víctor, si tienes o alguien de El Salvador que tenga alguna apreciación, ¿qué les parece la...?
Solicito la palabra.
Ah, sí, ¿Cómo no, don Fausto? Le doy la palabra. Tiene la palabra don Fausto Mejía Carrasco. ¿Nos escucha?
Sí, muchas gracias. Buenos días con todos los amigos de CoST Internacional. Un saludo desde Ecuador. Soy Fausto Mejía Carrasco, miembro del grupo multisectorial. Para Hamish, una felicitación por su excelente presentación y quisiera formular la siguiente inquietud. Si bien es cierto, en la charla que nos ha dado Hamish, se ha visto la congruencia y la relación directa entre aseguramiento y divulgación, pero ¿cuál sería también la conexión, la relación con la auditoría social en función del aseguramiento? Eso por una parte. Y la otra, una inquietud bastante práctica para nosotros. La herramienta AX, que vemos que es indispensable para el aseguramiento, tal vez está también traducida al español, y si es que nos podrían facilitar para poderlo manejar e instruirnos al respecto. Muchas gracias a todos y felicitaciones por el evento. Gracias.
Okay, thank you, Fausto, for those questions. Can I just say, first of all, I've always been intrigued by Ecuador because I learned at school about the Quito effect, and I've always where you can hear radio signals far away because of the topography around Quito. So it's a country that's always fascinated me. So it's great to actually speak to somebody from Ecuador for the first time. You've asked some really good questions, and I hope I'll answer them all. You asked about the relationship between assurance and social accountability. There are two distinct aspects of this. The first one is that the assurance report turns the disclosed data into compelling information. So by definition, data has no meaning. If I told you this road from A to B cost $5 million a kilometer, even if you're an engineer, you wouldn't know if that's a high cost or a low cost unless you knew much more about the details, about the context. Was it in a remote area? Was it mountainous? What was the width? And so on. So without the context, you can't understand the data. And what assurance does is to turn the data into compelling information. And the problem with that normally is that how do you know you can trust the person who is turning the data into information? In the case of cost assurance, you can trust the assurance report because it isn't commissioned by the private sector. It's not commissioned by government or by civil society. It's commissioned by the multi-stakeholder group. So it has got the backing of all three of those. So when it comes to social accountability,
Hamish,
yes?
sorry to interrupt, but Francis is out of the Spanish channel. And we're not. Francis?
Sí, es que se fue la luz aquí, perdón, pero que me asignen como intérprete nuevamente. Estoy en el celular.
Está bien.
Hola.
Sí, está bien, Francis. Ahorita más nos encarga de eso.
Lo estoy haciendo, sí.
Gracias.
Sorry, Hamish. Francis lost connection. So she's going to be named interpreter again. Manu will do so because
okay.
she had a problem with the electricity.
Okay, and there's a dog somewhere as well.
It was a really nice answer, so I would like everyone to understand.
Okay, are you back now? So how far had I reached, Francis? Had I described the
all the answer, Hamish.
All the answer, yeah. Francis, can you hear?
Okay, so there are two aspects to relationship
Bueno,
between
hay dos aspectos
the first one is
al aseguramiento.
information that makes sense. So it is compelling. It's presented in a way that makes people want to ask questions. So it's of interest, it's relevant to the people. So that's a really important part, because citizens do not want to spend their weekends reading websites about what's going on projects. They want to hear the headline that there's this concern has been raised and it affects them. So it's the having access to that information is really important. And the social accountability activities involving the media as well, it's all about communicating that information to the people. That's one part. But there's another very important link, is that part of the assurance process is to assess whether the regulations and the laws are in place for participation by citizens through some mechanism in the planning process and in the design process and in implementation. And very often it is there in the contract that the contractor must, any discharge of water from the site must be discussed in advance with community representatives and so on. So that's a really important part of the assurance process. It's not a matter of the assurance team goes and says, you must do this. The assurance team looks to see, what does the law say? What does the contract say? And is what is happening on site consistent with the contract? So if, for instance, there is absolutely no mechanism for engagement between the contractor and the citizens in that area, but the law says that there should be, and it's not in the contract, then the recommendation should be that the contract should be revised to reflect the law. And if it's not not there at all, recommendation could be that international good practice is that everybody benefits from more participation. But it's not going in after the event saying you must do this now. It's looking at the systems and procedures in place. So that was to answer that question. Then you asked about the Acts framework, whether there's a Spanish version. Yes, well, not yet, but it will be in Spanish. But I've got a story here. Is that I have used this framework in many countries, and of course in English it spells the word acts, which is a very positive word, acts. And about 10 years ago, I was in a workshop with CSOs in Mongolia, who were monitoring infrastructure in Mongolia from all over the country. And of course, they speak a very different language, Mongolian, with a different script even. And so we had a half-hour session in which people had to come up with an acronym which spelt a word which was meaningful. And everybody was working away at this at the tables, discussing different words and so on. And then suddenly, the four people at one table, they jumped in the air and said, huch. And there's a word in Mongolian, huch, which means the power to do good, which is a great word. And the first letter of each of those words spelt capacity, accountability, and trust. So the huch framework is now very well known in Mongolia. And in fact, about 6 months later, I was talking to somebody from the World Bank about their projects. And they say, oh, it's amazing. We've got this citizens group that is using this thing called the Hutch framework on our projects. And this was the one which they developed in a workshop. So when it goes into Spanish, it'll just be the Spanish translation. But I am certain that somebody, one of you, will come up with an acronym which works really well in Spanish. So it's a challenge for you.
Thank you very much, Hamish. Gracias, Hamish. Le doy la palabra a don Carlos Espinal de Honduras.
Gracias también, Hamish.
Ah.
Okay.
Don Carlos Espinal.
Muy buenos días, ¿me escuchan?
Sí, se le escucha.
Y muy buenos días a Hamish y demás compañeros que han asistido a este interesante taller. Soy Carlos Espinal del GMS CoST Honduras y represento a una de las organizaciones de sociedad civil. Una de mis preguntas para Hamish es, desde su experiencia, ¿cómo se ha podido hacer el levantamiento de información, sobre todo proactiva o reactiva, cuando se trata de proyectos de emergencia? Como es de conocimiento quizás de muchos, Honduras ha sido ya afectada por dos fenómenos naturales, ETA y IOTA recientemente, y la red vial y mucha infraestructura quedó prácticamente dañada, ¿verdad? No sabría decirles en qué porcentaje aún, pero sí los daños aún no se han terminado de cuantificar. Y la participación de la iniciativa CoST será fundamental en la transparencia de estos proyectos en una primera etapa de emergencia, ¿verdad? Con habilitación de tramos carreteros o puentes Bailey, y posteriormente en una segunda fase de un plan de reconstrucción. Pero el punto clave de nuestra interrogante es, como esto quizás lo pasamos nosotros hace unos 22 años con el huracán Mitch, no se había vuelto a repetir un fenómeno de esta naturaleza con tanto impacto en la infraestructura, es los niveles de divulgación de información, porque mucho se hace a través de emergencia. Y a veces en la emergencia, pues, se pueden cometer una serie de irregularidades, ¿verdad? Y la falta de divulgación de información es una de nuestras inquietudes y preocupaciones, porque esta información es fundamental para poder hacer el aseguramiento, tanto en una primera parte, ¿verdad?, de revisar portales, CISOCs que tenemos en Honduras, pero los entes encargados, las instituciones públicas, pues tienen un bajo nivel de publicación, máxime ahora en la emergencia. Entonces, podemos mandar el equipo multidisciplinario al campo, pueden levantar informe, pueden hablar con las comisiones ciudadanas de transparencia que tenemos, pero no se cuenta en la mayoría de los casos con información, digamos, de los contratos, las órdenes de inicio, ¿verdad? Realmente lo que se termina pagando por el proyecto, y entonces eso puede traer como consecuencia, ¿verdad?, no contar con esa información para analizarla, o quizás la información puede llegar posteriormente con los meses, ¿verdad? Y eso lo que hace es que el aseguramiento no sea lo más oportuno posible, ¿verdad? Que el aseguramiento no sea lo más oportuno. Desde su experiencia, Hamish, quizás en otras latitudes donde se haya presentado iguales situaciones de naturaleza, cómo poder contrarrestar, ¿verdad?, digámoslo así, problema o inconveniente de que no se divulgue la información proactiva por parte de las instituciones públicas encargadas de una reconstrucción, ¿verdad?, por emergencia. Así que me gustaría conocer su experiencia y sus recomendaciones. Gracias a todos. Saludos.
Okay, thank you for that. I need to just say here that my experience of these things has not actually been within CoST. It's been within an engineering context outside of CoST. But there's some very important principles that I think have been learnt I mean, my experience has been most recently probably the Nepal earthquake, where so much was done under emergency procurement because it was so urgent, and yet, in fact, nothing had actually been achieved after 1 year because of the bad governance. So there was the excuse of not being transparent because it was so urgent, but in fact, nothing happened. So, but just to answer a few questions, just because it's emergency procurement and that there's an urgency about it, at least in theory, doesn't mean that there can't be disclosure. It might be that there's a real concern that the effort required for disclosure takes time and therefore it's not the priority. Fine. Instead of disclosing in real time, why not make a commitment that this will be disclosed, everything will be disclosed as usual within 2 weeks or 2 months or even 6 months, but just to make a commitment to disclosure in principle, even if the excuse is it can't be done quickly, seek a commitment to disclose in principle by some given time, because that still then engenders accountability later on. The next thing to point out is that after a disaster, the problem isn't that there is no data there. The problem is that there is so much data being held by so many different people. There's all of the international bodies, they've got all of their data, and the NGOs have got their data, and local authorities have got their data. And the problem isn't the lack of data, it's the lack of coordination of that data or bringing it together. So, which brings me to the next principle, is to just focus on a few simple things. You know, just a very, very simple things about, which could be geo-referenced information about what contracts have been awarded, for what purpose, at what location, to which contractor, and what is the value and the scope of that contract. That is only a few data points, but that itself is, if that was done well, and if CoST could help pull that together, you would quickly find that all the different entities working with this disaster would start wanting to access that overall data and would be happy to feed data into your system. The best thing is not to ask people to do things differently, but to ask them, what are you doing? What data do you have? And what would be the easiest way to share that data? And then to make the effort to pick out the key things and do that well, start doing it well with a small amount. And if more comes through, that's really good. So then you've got some basic idea of what's going on where. But how do you achieve the next stage of accountability there? And that's where citizen engagement comes in. But again, this isn't CoST's job to do it, because somebody else probably wants to do this and could do this. To have a feedback mechanism where somebody can send in a photograph or information about, let's say, a bridge is being replaced, and they have seen or they've been told that the bridge is being, a contract has been awarded to replace that bridge. Okay, if they can send in a geo-reference photograph of that bridge on a day when the contractor's already been paid 50% and nothing has happened, then that starts to be a very strong assurance process. Can flow from that sort of information. The problem again with that kind of thing is not a lack of data, but soon you have too much data. So again, do a few things simply well. has that helped start to answer your question?
Carlos?
Sí, muchas gracias, sí. Sí, ya hemos tomado algunas notas. Muchas gracias, Hamish.
Great.
Only to include some comments, Hamish, from Mr. Jaime Sanchez, who is the champion of CoST in Ecuador. He said that congratulations for the webinar. He believes that we can connect these tools with the social audit or the projects of auditing, and to find evidence to find evidence in terms of the conditions, the criteria, the causes and effects of the infrastructure, and also an answer for the colleague of Honduras that we should follow the process even in an emergency. Thank you very much, Jaime and Hamish. Do we have another question, comment from maybe Costa Rica or El Salvador that also have experience in? Also, everyone is open. Jalisco as well.
Yes.
Jose,
can you hear me, Manuel?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, thank you. Good morning to everybody. Well, thank you very much for the presentation, Hamish. We were just commenting that it will be very interesting for all the colleagues to share a little bit of our experience. We actually developed some Excel tools like these ones, but they were kind of different because we can see now in this that Hamish was presenting that some part of the analysis can be done within the Excel tool. So that is going to help us a lot in processing all the data that we collect. As we were part of the team, of the assurance team, being part of the University of Costa Rica, actually in the LANAME, in the laboratory of national materials, for testing materials. And so we don't focus usually in other areas that are beyond the technical parts of the projects. So we try to keep that scope in the assurance, in the first assurance that Costa Rica did. But as we have a very permanent process of collecting data for our road audits, it wasn't difficult for us to get many information, and we could analyze and make some other analysis about other aspects beyond just the technical part. So we could share analysis on the, for example, the contracting part, and also how the disclosure of the data decreases as we advance in the projects. We have many information at the beginning, but then at the end of the projects in Costa Rica, we found in the 10 projects that we analyzed that the data disclosure was decreased at the end of the project. So that was part of the analysis that we created with the Excel tools. But as I was saying, these tools that we just saw, I believe that they can complete a little bit more than what we could make in that experience because of the these extra analysis that are done within the Excel tool.
Thank you, Jose. That all makes sense. And a few thoughts just occurred to me as you're making those comments. It's great that researchers are involved in assurance, because academics love data, and data is very revealing if you analyze it well. And that's that's really good. But as you alluded to, there's an issue beyond the data, which is a bit more subtle, which is looking at drivers of performance. So when you say that the disclosure rates decrease towards the end of the project, what I would find interesting then is to ask why. What was the reason for this? Was it because it was too demanding? Was it because it was too embarrassing? Was it a lack of resources? You know, it's really important to understand why. And one of the, when I used to work for a very large engineering company, and I used to train young consultants to go off to do consultancies in different places. And one of the things I used to say, and this applies to assurance as well, is if you are a consultant and you ask the same question from 3 different stakeholders, exactly the same question, and you get 3 conflicting answers, your job as a consultant isn't to judge which answer is correct, but it's to understand why all of the answers are correct. Why is it that this person says that the road cost $17 million, a different person says it cost $12 million, and a third person says it cost $45 million? All correct, or at least why each person believes that that's the truth, or why each person says that. And it's often in trying to resolve those discrepancies, or those apparent discrepancies, that we gain an understanding of what's really going on. So that's why I'd be very interested to know what the reasons were for the disclosure falling off. Another quick comment about universities is when you're looking at disclosure, just in the purest sense, that the data that is disclosed according to the OC for IDS or the IDS, those are just data points. And you don't have to have a site visit even to conduct assurance. You can still just analyze the data over time in a sector. You can come up with conclusions. And universities are very well placed to analyze data from a sector, perhaps over a 5-year period, and look for trends and lessons learned and so on. An important point here is that university doesn't have to even be in the same country. It can be in a different country. Students, their research project to take data from Costa Rica and analyze it and learn something about that. So there's great potential for, I see in the future, just as we're starting to see elements of assurance become part of disclosure, I anticipate in future that a lot of assurance will be done by researchers. Once the data set is really good and consistently good, then a lot of assurance, not all of it, a lot of assurance can be done by teams anywhere in the world, at least starting to raise issues.
Thank you very much, Hamish. And I don't know if someone from Mexico or Jalisco, Mexico, or from El Salvador or Panama wants to also include a comment or a question on this tool. Victor or Aida or Claudia, you're allowed to make your comments also in Spanish. Víctor.
Claro, un saludo a todos, gusto de verlos, de estar con ustedes ahora. Sí, más que todo un comentario nada más, ¿verdad? Obviamente que son herramientas muy útiles para nosotros para mejorar nuestros procesos de aseguramiento. Tenemos que revisar, ¿verdad? El material, los Excel, ¿verdad? Para poderlos implementar. Creo yo que lo más importante es precisamente que año con año mejoremos nuestras recomendaciones y podamos enfocarnos incluso como región, ¿verdad? En aquellos puntos donde nosotros vemos que estamos deficientes en la gestión de los proyectos. Todos necesitamos mejorar los tiempos de ejecución de los proyectos. Hay mucho atraso en los proyectos, creo yo en toda la región, hay mucho sobrecosto al final sobre los proyectos. Entonces, podernos enfocar también como región en ver qué mecanismos y recomendaciones podemos implementar para poder hacer nuestros proyectos más eficientes, ¿verdad? Solamente y agradecer nuevamente a Hamish por la herramienta.
Gracias, Víctor. Muy amable.
Thank you, Victor, and nice to see you again. Just one comment. I mean, I agree totally with what you're saying about the importance of the recommendations and how to develop them. And some countries make lots of recommendations, and then the next assurance report just says, we recommend that you implement recommendations of the last assurance report. And there is not much expectation of recommendations being implemented. Now, obviously, if there are things that are very clear and need to be communicated, that's fine. But the art of developing a good recommendation is that you include at least some recommendations that you know will have traction with all the stakeholders. So just as, I know it's not always this easy, but if you have a situation where you either through your experience of the sector or through use of the ACT tool or some other way, you start to have a feel for what the issues are on a project. And before you do your site visit, you've already begun to collect data that might point in this direction. Then on the site visit, you confirm your concerns about that. Then during the site visit, it's often a good time to bring together the project owner and the contractor and the supervisor, and perhaps also somebody from the community, and discuss some problem which everybody agrees is a problem, and start to develop a recommendation which everybody thinks would make sense. And sometimes these are things that are really obvious, and everybody has known for years, but they've given up talking about it. So for instance, in some countries, and I don't know your region well enough, but in some countries, the budget cycle means that the contract is awarded just when the rain starts and it's a bad time to build. Or it's a 1-year budget cycle, and so the spending is always in the last 3 months. You spend a lot very, very fast. And both of those things cause problems. They cause inefficiency, mismanagement, and corruption. Everybody knows that, but it's been happening for years. And so, but within CoST, what we can do is to put clear data to this, put it in an assurance report. This then has substance, and everybody can back it and say there's a need there to follow up on this recommendation. This is what happened in Afghanistan when the CoST assurance report recommended, well, it pointed out that most of the problems happening on most of the projects were because of poor design, a weak planning and design processes. So and everybody knew this. They weren't spending enough on design. They were rushing it through. Everyone knew this, but the CoST report documented it in a very factual, objective way and pointed to the benefits of improving the design. So the minister saw this and said, fine, we'll set up a design review unit and we'll spend more money on design and we'll do it better. And that's how within the first year that saved them $8 million. It wasn't that CoST was the first to think of this recommendation, but the CoST was the first to provide an evidence base to make it very difficult to refuse to follow that recommendation.
Thank you very much, Hamish and Victor. Aida, do you want to add a comment? You told me. Mm-hmm. You have the word.
Hola, muy buenos días a todos. Hola Hamish, muchas gracias y qué gusto verte nuevamente. Y bueno, buenas tardes también a Evelyn. No sé si hay alguien más por ahí que está fuera de nuestra zona. Bueno, primero que todo, pues agradecer a Hamish por tan importante presentación. La verdad que para nosotros en Panamá, en CoST Panamá, es súper importante este tema. Creo que somos, bueno, sí, uno de los únicos, de los pocos que nos hace falta realizar pues un estudio de aseguramiento. Y finalmente, pues ya puedo de manera oficial anunciarles que a partir de junio del 2021, ya Panamá estará trabajando en su primer estudio de aseguramiento. Así que pues este manual que nos ha presentado el día de hoy Hamish será de muchísima ayuda pues para poder llevarlo adelante. Esperamos presentar ya los resultados, hacer lanzamiento pues ya a finales del otro año, pero pues iniciaremos a partir de mediados pues del año en todo el desarrollo de esto, ¿no? Y bueno, todas estas herramientas, todos estos Excel, súper buenas herramientas, me fascinaron. La verdad es que yo soy abogada, yo no soy experta en temas pues de obras, etcétera, así que pues a mí me serán de muchísima ayuda cuando pues ya toque trabajar con el equipo de aseguramiento, que como que he escuchado muchas experiencias de cómo lo han llevado los diferentes países en la región y serán pues de mucha ayuda también para llevar nuestro proceso adelante. Y por supuesto el manual será pues como la Biblia para nosotros para poder pues desarrollar un buen estudio de aseguramiento que sea de ayuda también a las mismas entidades procurantes para poder pues mejorar sus obras, sus maneras de contratar, sus maneras de planificar, etc. Y también aprovecho rápidamente para agradecer a los miembros del grupo multisectorial de CoST Panamá que están aquí presentes, sobre todo los ingenieros que están presentes, pues, que son los que van a ayudarnos, pues, mucho más durante el desarrollo de nuestro primer estudio de aseguramiento. Y bueno, eso es todo, nada más felicitar a Hamish y gracias.
Thank you, Aida. Nice to see you again. Just one thing I need to just put pressure on you. The newer members of CoST, or the people doing an assurance report now, can learn the lessons from all the mistakes that have been made. Okay, so we're expecting a really good report, and by good I mean simple. Do the simple things really well so that nobody complains about the first assurance report. Everyone thinks, wow, that's good. And CoST, Panama becomes a trusted partner. Everybody feels we can trust you, and then you can work from there. Don't try and achieve too much. Don't try to become Honduras overnight. You know, do what you can do well. When you're editing, I remember I was involved very closely in the first assurance report in Ukraine with Natalie, and I've forgotten. I think she rejected it 12 times. The MSG rejected the report 12 times because she wanted to be sure that the first assurance report was right. It didn't contain anything that wasn't based on facts. And the hardest thing is when you have some really interesting information or ideas or things you've discovered that are wrong, and you have to remove it from the report because you haven't got sufficient evidence. There's too much personal judgment in there, not enough evidence. Remove it. It's a hard thing to do because everything in you wants to point to this, but focus on what you really have the strong evidence for. So I'm looking forward to seeing that really strong report next year.
I think we are with the time for the closing now. Muchísimas gracias a todos y todas en este espacio. Recalcar la importancia de las herramientas que hemos estado trabajando desde el Secretariado Internacional para que sean utilizadas, para que sean probadas por ustedes en los aseguramientos. Yo creo que es de suma importancia el aporte que hacemos desde América Latina con nuestra experiencia, desde los primeros aseguramientos que se realizaron en Guatemala, las experiencias de El Salvador, de Honduras y la más reciente de Costa Rica. Creo que, como dice Hamish, hemos ido elevando el nivel y los nuevos programas que estarán haciendo aseguramientos como Panamá, como Ecuador y Jalisco, pues obviamente tienen una vara más elevada. Creo que es de suma importancia la posibilidad de utilizar tanto el manual como la herramienta de la guía, y obviamente la herramienta del Excel, que yo creo que es la que, desde que la vimos hace algún tiempo, los primeros insights, todos hemos estado muy fascinados y a la expectativa de poderla tener acceso a ella para poder implementarla y utilizarla. Entonces, creo que van a ser herramientas de mucha ayuda, nos hace el trabajo más simple, más fácil, siempre teniendo en consideración también que el resultado de los aseguramientos también es obviamente el impacto que queremos generar. Entonces las recomendaciones, el seguimiento a estas recomendaciones es de suma importancia. También cómo hacemos para que todo este trabajo técnico propio de la ingeniería, cómo se lo traducimos a los ciudadanos para que lo puedan entender de forma fácil, de que sea un número, que sea una frase, lo que se lleve el ciudadano producto de nuestro trabajo. Creo que esa es nuestra meta, poder generar un impacto, un cambio de políticas públicas, un cambio en la forma en la que se gestionan los dineros públicos en materia de infraestructura. Muchísimas gracias. No quiero cerrar el taller sin antes agradecerle el tiempo a Hamish, la disposición, el excelente trabajo de muy alta calidad. Hemos estado trabajando en este producto en las últimas semanas bastante fuerte. Tuvimos el taller con las otras regiones y decidimos hacer algo con traducción simultánea para los países de América Latina. Gracias a Evelyn por también sacar de su tiempo y acompañarnos, y a todos los miembros del grupo multisectorial, equipos de aseguramiento, y obviamente a los gerentes de país que hacen todo el link para que esto sea posible. Hay dos eventos que me gustaría reiterar. El primero lo señaló Evelyn en el chat, es el lanzamiento del Índice de Transparencia de Infraestructura en la conferencia anticorrupción internacional que organiza Transparencia Internacional. Están todos cordialmente invitados a este lanzamiento del índice. Es una herramienta también nueva que trae el secretario internacional y que esperamos poder implementar en todos los países de la región. Y el evento regional también en conmemoración a los 10 años de CoST en América Latina, que es a través del programa de CoST Guatemala, que es el primer programa. Vamos a tener 2 días de talleres, de espacios de participación, donde obviamente el tema central va a ser el tema de transparencia en infraestructura. Va a ser un momento bastante dinámico, con exponentes internacionales también, así que están todos cordialmente invitados. Hamish, if you want, I can give you 1 minute also to say some words. Y muchísimas gracias a todos y todas.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for your interest and attention. It's been a delight as always. I should just mention that my wife has started to learn Portuguese. So, and we're going to be visiting Brazil sometime next year if we're allowed to. So if that happens, I'm hoping I might be able to come up further north and pay a visit again. Thank you all very much.
Muchísimas gracias. Terminamos justo a tiempo. Just finish on time. Gracias a todos y todas, y que tengan lindo almuerzo los que están en horario de almuerzo, y cena los que están en horarios de cena. Chao, chao. Cuídense mucho.
Gracias, Francis. Excelente interpretación, como siempre.
Oh, gracias, Francis. Sí.
Buenos días, buenos días.
Muchas gracias a todos.
Saludos.
Gracias, un buen día con todos.
Bueno,
Thanks, Hamish. Well done.
buenos días desde Colina Santa Bárbara, Honduras.
Buenos días.
Thanks, Maro. Thanks, everyone. Gracias a todos.
Muchas gracias, hasta luego.
Que estén bien, cuídense.
Adiós.
Bye bye.
Adiós a todos, buen día.
Brenda, un placer. Que esté muy bien. Don Jaime, un placer verlo también. Álvaro.
Igualmente, Manuel. ¿Cómo te va? ¿Bien? ¿Todo tranquilo?
Todo tranquilo, sí. Esperando los próximos huracán que viene.
No, espero que ahora solo sean frentes fríos.
Ahora salió el de la niña que dice que viene con tormentas. Apenas.
Bueno, pero eso es parte de lo que... Y es algo de lo que hablaba él de Ecuador, me llamó la atención. Yo creo que hay que chequear un procedimiento, a darle tal vez ayuda a todos los gobiernos sobre cómo contratar en épocas de emergencia y cómo agarrar, distinguir la emergencia de la reconstrucción. Yo creo que eso es base importante. Pero bueno, hay mucho que hacer, así que gracias por todo.
Con gusto, Álvaro.
Gracias a todos. Chao.
Gracias a todos.
Chao, Daniel.
Bye, everyone.
Chao.
Gracias, saludos.
Chao, Manuel. Evelyn.
Hola.
Jason.
Placer. Pura vida.
Gracias.
Chao, que tengan buen
Dios,
día.
Jason. Suerte.
Chao.
Adiós.
Dios, Evelyn. Todos, gracias.
Chao. Don Fausto, muchas
Buenos
gracias.
días, buenos días, buenos días.
José Arnaldo.
Buenos días.
Buenos días desde San José de Colinas, Santa Bárbara, Honduras. Me conecté en los últimos segundos, pero por lo menos para saludarles nomás, ¿verdad? Porque no podía hacerlo. Gracias, bendiciones a todos.
Bendiciones, José Arnaldo. Un placer verlo.
Gracias.
Chao, Hazel. Nos vemos. Hablamos. Thank you,
Bye,
Hazel.
Manu.
Thank you very much.
Bye, Hamish. Nice to see you. It was
I see
great.
you.
Bye.
Great. Bye. Goodbye, Maria.
Good Maria. And for all.